I'm Humphrey Tonkin, and I'm here with Ulrich Becker, who is a publisher of Esperanto books, amongst other things. And he was one of the Soros lecturers when we did the Soros Lecture Series. We're here to talk particularly about what he talked about in his lecture. And so I'm going to start, Ulrich, by asking you, what did you talk about in your lecture?
Well, I spoke mostly about the cultural achievements of Esperanto, because there are a lot of doubts among many people what Esperanto can do culturally.
Yes.
And if it has any culture at all. And with a special focus on publishing and, in general, the history of publishing and what I do as a publisher.
Now, is publishing something important for the Esperanto movement?
I would think so. The whole language started by one book that has been published by the creator of Esperanto, Zamenhof, and the first conversation came quite a bit later. And throughout the years, translations into Esperanto played a big role in the development of the language. And yes, there has been a big role in the creation and the development of the language.
So in a sense, then, Esperanto was a written language before it was a spoken language?
Yes, and that is kind of different from most so-called natural languages.
Right. And then, of course, also, people who spoke the language lived in different places, so they needed a means of communication.
Yes, and that's why correspondence was first the main means of communication among the few people who spoke Esperanto in the different countries of Europe mostly.
And magazines, periodicals, those kinds of things, did that happen as well?
Yeah, this came then at the end of the 19th, at the beginning of the 20th century. There were magazines that developed in France, in Germany.
Now, was the history of publishing a fairly sort of constant process, or were there sort of ups and downs? I suppose there must have been ups and downs because of 2 world wars.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There were a lot of ups and downs, and we have to remember that publishing in Esperanto was not always a big professional enterprise. It was very often depended on one person or a small group of people who had to finance, to edit, and to distribute the things. And if one of these people didn't contribute anymore, then the publication quickly died. That happens quite often. But on the other hand, there are also other magazines that exist already more than many decades, or in the case of the main magazine Esperanto, already over 100 years.
Yes, I suppose that's true. That's right. Are there other, in addition to Esperanto, are there other periodicals that have lasted for so long, or anything like that?
Anything like that?
Probably not very many,
I don't think so.
Yeah.
No, not that long.
Right. And the other point, of course, that you make is that by publishing in Esperanto, you don't become rich, right? Yeah. Yes. Now, what kinds of things do you publish?
We publish fiction and non-fiction, specialty books, dictionaries, books about Esperanto in English or in German, linguistic books. We publish prose and poetry, and we publish a literary magazine 3 times a year.
Yeah. What about the magazine? Tell me about that.
It's called Belletra Almanaco, and it started in 2007.
Yeah.
And it is published 3 times a year with 140 to 170 pages per issue. And there's a group of editors throughout the world who contribute it and who take care of contents and of language and make the selection. And it has prose and poetry translated and originally written in Esperanto, essays, articles, book reviews, sometimes interviews.
So it's sort of one of the things, I suppose, that keep the literature of Esperanto coming. That you publish new works, and so then in your book series, the books that you publish, do you publish authors who originally appeared in Belletra Almanacco?
That happens, or the other way around. I find an interesting author, and I encourage him or her to publish something in the magazine.
What for you is an interesting author?
Oh, that is a very general question. I mean, a very specific question. Someone who has something to say, who knows what he's talking about, and who has a pretty good command of Esperanto.
So why does that last thing matter so much? Why is a good command of Esperanto important?
As we said earlier, the publishing world in Esperanto is mostly an enterprise of a small group of people. Like in my case, it's more or less a one-man thing, especially the Esperanto part. And if I would have the time to edit an entire book from beginning to the end and correct thousands of mistakes,
yes,
because I think the book is worth it, then I could do that, but I don't have this time.
Right.
So I need to encourage people to find other editors or that they know and who can take care of the language of the book, and or tell them that they should first continue studying Esperanto before they write a book.
Well, that does happen, doesn't it, amongst Esperanto speakers?
Yes.
As soon as they've learned how to use verbs, they think they can write poetry.
Exactly.
Yes.
That happens quite often.
But on the other hand, clearly an ability to write good Esperanto matters, because that serves as a model for others, presumably.
Yes.
Right?
The publishing world has a big responsibility in terms of the quality of the language. Yeah.
Now, in Mondial, your publishing house, do you do everything from beginning to end? Do you publish in a conventional way, or do you use other kinds of methods to produce your books?
Well, I do everything from the beginning to the end. I make the selection of the books, and I make the contract with the author, and I look at the quality of the work. I usually don't accept things that haven't been looked at by other Esperanto speakers of a certain quality. And then, if necessary, we do some editing together with the author, and then I publish. I publish a paper copy of the book, and if possible, I publish a digital copy, an ebook online.
But a lot of that work then is it done on a publishing on demand basis?
Most of it.
Yeah, so you don't have large inventories of material.
And with the print run of books in Esperanto, it wouldn't make much sense to produce 2,000 copies of a poetry book.
Yes.
It would take probably decades to sell that.
Yeah. Now, of course, you're not the first publishing house to come along. Have there been sort of key publishing houses in the history of Esperanto?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I already said that Zamanov was the first publisher, if you want, who published the first textbook and grammar book. After that, at the beginning of the 20th century, when Esperanto somewhat took off, the outside world got an interest in publishing in Esperanto, like the French publisher Hachette, who published Zamenhof's work and other books.
And didn't they actually paid him a stipend every year to write for them, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Also in Germany, later there were publishing houses who produced works in Esperanto, even though they usually produce German language books. But then between the world wars, there were more and more publishing houses that came from inside the movement. For example, one of the biggest names between the world wars was Literatura Mondo.
Yes. And that was published where? Or that operated where?
Well, it moved around a lot. It started if I remember correctly, I think in Scandinavia. It was sometimes in Odessa, in Hungary, and in Scandinavia. It moved around a lot.
Well, there was that Hungarian period, wasn't there, in the 20s and 30s?
That was the most productive and creative.
When they were publishing a lot of stuff, right?
In really good quality.
Yeah, and in lots of ways, I guess it was in the 20s and 30s that Esperanto style sort of stabilized. People learned the difference between good Esperanto and bad Esperanto as a result of the example of some of the writers of that period.
Right, and that was a time when the first stylistic books came out.
So after World War II, presumably a lot of what was going on in the Esperanto movement fell apart during the war, and then publishers presumably began to publish books again. Yes. Was there any particular publisher who was influential during that period, as Literatura Mondo perhaps had been before the war?
Yes, one of the biggest names was Staffetto. That was a publishing house in Spain, and they published mostly fiction, prose, and poetry.
Yes,
and they really really created a lot of that can be seen today as classics of the Esperanto literature.
Yeah.
And they were really focusing on good quality, not only in terms of the language Esperanto, but also on what the books looked like.
Yes. Well, in fact, they have some beautiful little books they produce. That's right. And of course, the interesting thing about Staffetto, as compared to Mondial, is that with Staffetto, that was back before the days of automation.
Yes.
And Regulo Perez, the publisher, actually set his own type, right?
I'm not aware of this, but
well, he did. I can tell you. Yes, set his own type, and one of the reasons why he published a lot of poetry is because it didn't take a lot of type to do it. So he didn't have to break up the type and start again.
Right.
So it was a really sort of, I won't say amateur, because the production of these books was beautifully done.
Yes.
But it was a sort of hand-to-mouth operation. Whereas, I don't want to belittle what Mondial does, but life is a lot easier now than it was then, that's for certain. Yeah. Now, where do you sell your books? Who actually buys them?
Well, I sell most of my books through channels within the Esperanto movement.
Yes.
There are international and national Esperanto associations who buy the books and sell them in their bookstores or online. The biggest reseller of books is the World Esperanto Association. They currently have, I just read in the statistics, they offer currently 7,500 different titles by almost 2,000 different publishers, of whom many of them are certainly self-published books.
Wow, goodness.
But there were over time a lot of very small or one-man enterprises, and the bigger ones that we know.
I had no idea it was a number like that. That's a lot.
It's immense.
Yeah, and of course also having 7,000 titles is really interesting. Now, do you publish exclusively in Esperanto, or do you publish in other languages?
No, I publish also in English and in German about Esperanto. And I publish a few books in English, but that is not my focus anymore. The focus is really books in or about Esperanto.
Yes, yes. And if they're about Esperanto and in English, what sorts of books are they? When you say about Esperanto, that can mean lots of things.
Right. There are the dictionaries, and then like one of the biggest books or the most important title that I had. One of them is an English language encyclopedia about the history of the literature of Esperanto.
Yes, yeah. A hugely important book, in fact. Yeah, which everybody should know about, right?
Yes.
And it really brings together not only the entire history of Esperanto literature, but also details about the lives of the various authors, titles, and
reviews
so on.
about the books.
Yes,
yeah.
yes, it's a very impressive work. Now, what are your plans for the future?
Well, the thing with planning books in Esperanto is that you basically have to see what comes your way. It's not like I can say, oh, next year I want to publish 3 detective stories. I have no idea if anyone writing one right now.
Yes, I see.
So there are, you basically, how it works, you get offers from people who have written or translated something, and then you make a selection. So it's that's why I publish prose and poetry and nonfiction, because anything can be of interest.
So it's essentially like playing tennis, right? You know you're playing tennis, but you don't know where the ball's going to come from. Right.
That's a good way of describing it.
Right. Well, the future, if you think about the future of Esperanto publishing.
Well, if you think about the future of publishing in general.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
It's going more and more digital and online. And so I do a lot of my, I sell a lot of my books now on different outlets that sell only ebooks.
Yeah.
And I try to, with the help of print on demand, I can provide all my titles through Amazon and other online resellers. It depends also a little bit on the future of the Esperanto movement.
Of course, yes.
So there are ups and downs, as we have said in the past, and there will be ups and downs in the future. And from what I see is you have to adjust your strategy in publishing to where the Esperanto movement is going. Right now, it's going a little bit away from the organized movement, more to the wild Facebook and Twitter and Instagram Esperanto movement. And you have to somehow adjust and try to find new clients and writers in the new media.
Yeah, so it's much more unpredictable than it used to be.
It's way more unpredictable.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Ulrich, very much for your for this conversation about Esperanto publishing. And I hope you have lots of success in the future.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.